Hi 7E. In this lesson, I'm going to go through primary and secondary sources with you. So this is going to be in preparation for the upcoming skills test that is next Thursday. That's Thursday of week 4. We're going to be covering some important content that we need to know for that, and we're going to be having a look at primary and secondary sources. Now, the first thing I want you to do for this lesson, in your book, what I want you to do is write the heading primary and secondary sources. That is what we're mainly going to be looking at today. While you're writing that heading, I want you to just take note of a couple of icons we have on the screen. This is going to help us go through these lessons when I'm doing it online for you, when you're going back and revising, or maybe you're sitting outside and doing it to get some peace and quiet as well, so you can focus. This icon in the bottom right hand corner indicates when you are going to need to write something down on the screen. Now, what I want you to write down is going to have a yellow box around it. This is the important information that you're going to have in your book so that you can study properly for your assessment task and for this unit and get the work that you need to get done. So in this case, we have the icon at the bottom right, and that's telling us we have to write something, and then the title here is surrounded by a yellow box. So we know we need to write something, and what we need to write is surrounded by a yellow box. So we should have the heading primary and secondary sources at the very top of our history book on a new page. When you have that, we're going to go ahead and move on. If you're still going, you can pause the video. You can do this at your own pace, right? That's the beauty of this kind of style of lessons. We're going to be having a look at the two different kinds of sources today. So we're going to be having a look at primary sources and secondary sources. By the end of the lesson, you should confidently be able to know what a primary source is, what a secondary source is, and if I put some examples of each of those in front of you, you should be able to say that's a primary source and that's a secondary source. Okay, so we're going to go through the information on the screen now. It reads, when we are trying to find out about an historical event, we need to look at sources to help us discover what happened. So we need to look at some kind of evidence to help us figure out what happened at that historical period, at that time that we're studying. If we don't have sources, we're just guessing, right? We're just trying to guess. We need to look at evidence or sources to help us figure out what the truth is, what actually happened. As we've discussed a little bit already, historical sources are split into two main categories. We have primary and secondary, okay? Now, again, we will need to write down what's in the yellow square. So everything in this slide that's in that yellow box, you need to have in your books. That's super important. This is really important information, guys. Make sure you write that down. Pause the video if you have to pause the video. You can pause it for as long as you need to. And then we're going to move on to talk about primary sources. What is a primary source? A primary source is an original first-hand account of an event, topic, or historical time period. Okay, so just again, note that is in a yellow box and we do have to write that down. We're writing down everything in the yellow box there. So a primary source is an original first-hand account of an event, topic, or historical time period. In simplified terms, guys, what that means is a primary source is essentially something that is from the period of time we are studying. Okay, so primary sources come from the time period being studied. So let's think of some examples there. All right, look at what's on the screen at the moment. We're looking at some bones. If you were an archaeologist, which is someone who goes and digs looking for artifacts, looking for evidence, and you were studying dinosaurs, for example, or animals of any kind that have existed in a past period of time, you might come across some bones. These bones were buried in the earth after that animal died. Okay, these bones are from the period of time that you're studying, right? So because of that, they would be a primary source. They are from the period of time you're looking at. So if you were an archaeologist studying ancient animals and you dug up these bones, this would be a primary source because it is from the period of time you're studying, okay? Another example here is this letter. Now, if you zoom in really close, I can't do it on these slides, I don't think, but if I go out, maybe I can. if you zoom, here we go. If we zoom into this letter, what we'll see is right here, the letter is from 1932 or 7. I can't, 2 or 7. 1930. We'll say it's a 2 with a squiggly line for the sake of it. Okay. Just so we can understand the concept I'm talking about. Now, if you were studying the year 1932, this would be another example of a primary source, and that is because this letter was written by someone in the year 1932. It is a source that is from the same time period that you're studying. That is how you know it's a primary source. It's from the period of time we were studying. Now, before we move on, make sure you do have what's in this yellow box written down. It's really important you have both that yellow box written down and this yellow box written down. We want that in our books before we move on. So pause the video if you have to do that. Now, we're going to have a look at secondary sources. So we know what a primary source is. We know a primary source is from the period of time we're studying, but a secondary source is a source that does not come from the time period that we're studying. So what would that look like? Let's have a think. Just again, make sure we're writing down what's in that yellow box, okay, before we move on. Now that you have that written down, pause the video if you have to. Let's have a think about some secondary sources. What might they be? Secondary sources are often written about the time period being studied, but they are not from that time period. So just stop and have a think. What is something that might be written about the past, but it's not actually from the past? Get an idea in your head what it might be. And we'll have a look at some examples now. Make sure you pause the video and write down what's in that yellow box first. You need that in your book, really important. Okay? Some examples of secondary sources. Here we have a textbook. Okay, so let's have a look at the textbook. Let's say we have a textbook and maybe this textbook is teaching us about ancient Egypt, for example. This is a book that someone has made, and maybe they wrote the book and they published it in the year, let's say 2025. And it's telling us information about ancient Egypt. This is a secondary source because it is not from the time period being studied. What has happened is somebody has looked at evidence from ancient Egypt, they've written about that evidence, and they've presented that information to us. So they've given us information about ancient Egypt, but what they've given us is not something from ancient Egypt. It is a textbook that has been written in the year 2025. So because it is not from the time period that we're studying, in this case ancient Egypt, for this example's sake, that would be a secondary source. However, another example that we can see is a television documentary. Okay, so again, you might watch a television documentary on World War II, for example. Now, this is a secondary source because it's information telling us about World War II, but it's a documentary that was made after World War II actually happened. Okay, it was made after that time period. So for that reason, it's a secondary source because it is not from the time period that we're studying. Okay. Just again, before we move on, make sure you do have what's down in that yellow box for me. Really important, super important. Okay, once you've got that written down, we'll move on. And we're going to do a little quiz for you. I want you to have a guess which, for each of these, is it a primary or a secondary source? We'll try to apply what we've just learned. So the first one is a speech given in 2018 about dinosaurs. Someone is giving a speech in the year 2018 and they're telling us information about dinosaurs. Is that a primary or a secondary source? Have a think. Pause the video if you need some more time. Your answer is coming in 3, 2, 1. It's a secondary source. And the reason is, right, this is a speech given in 2018. I know I was alive in 2018 and I didn't see any dinosaurs in my backyard, right? Dinosaurs existed a long, long, long time ago, and this person is giving a speech in 2018 telling us information about the past, all right? So this is information that is not from the time period being studied. If it were fossils from a dinosaur, that would be a primary source. But because it is written information telling us about dinosaurs, or a speech telling us about dinosaurs, it is a secondary source. Let's do the next one. A handwritten letter from the time of a Viking invasion. Is that a primary or a secondary source? Someone has found a handwritten letter from the time of a Viking invasion. Have a think. Pause the video if you need to. Your answer coming in 3, 2, 1. It is a primary source, and the key giveaway there was it is from the time of a Viking invasion. So if we are studying time period of Vikings, this letter is actually from the time period that we're studying. If it is from the time period we're studying, it is a primary source. That is how we know. Second last one now. A photograph of the Queen on the day she opened the Scottish Parliament. So we have a photograph that was taken on the day that the Queen opened the Scottish Parliament. Primary or secondary? Pause the video if you need to. Your answer coming in 3, 2, 1. It is a primary source. Now, a photograph is taken of the Queen on the same day that she's opening the Scottish Parliament. So if we were studying the time period of the opening of the Scottish Parliament, and we came across a photo of that event happening, what that means is someone would have had to be at that event at the time and take that photograph at the time that we are studying. So because this photo was taken of the event that we are studying, someone was there taking that photo at the same time of the time period that we're studying, that is a primary source. We have one more to go. If you're getting some of these wrong, that's okay. That's how we learn. I am going to have a quiz at the end of this lesson that will help you hopefully really put yourself to the test and help you clarify anything that you may be slightly confused about. And of course, you can always ask me about it too. The next one is a textbook designed to teach students about the Roman Empire. Is a textbook a primary or a secondary source? Have a think. Your answer is in 3, 2, 1. It is a secondary source. So it is a textbook teaching us about something that has already happened. The Roman Empire is back here, and the textbook was made all the way in, let's say, 2025. It's not made at the time that we're studying. It's made in the future, and it's talking about the time we're studying. So if it is not from the time we're studying, it is a secondary source. Okay, so the key question we have to ask ourselves to find out whether it's primary or secondary is simply, is this source from the time period being studied? That will help us figure it out most of the time. Now, we're going to take a look at some advantages of primary sources. Why are they really good? Why are they often better than secondary sources? Okay, let's have a look. Take note, we do need to write something down, and everything we need to write down in our history books is in this yellow box here. So what are some advantages of primary sources? Primary sources are eyewitness accounts, so they're generally considered to be more reliable. What this means is because they're from the time period being studied, that person was actually there. They were truly there seeing it happen. So if it's a photograph, that is a real photo of that thing happening. If it's a written letter, that is someone who might be writing about what they actually saw with their own eyes. But a secondary source is not from that time period. So secondary sources have had to interpret primary sources. So that means they've had to look at primary sources and say, okay, this is what I think this means. So you have the primary source, and then you have the secondary source who's had to look at that primary source and then try to tell you about it. Okay, so that person might have allowed their own thinking process to mix up the facts. It's slightly less reliable because you're not just looking at an objective fact, you're looking at what someone thinks about that fact. So it's introducing an extra step there. So secondary sources have had to interpret primary sources to get their information. This means that when we read a secondary source, We are reading someone's perspective on a primary source. So think of a textbook. A textbook is telling you about, usually they'll be telling you about primary sources. They might show you some fossils and show you some photos of pyramids, or show you some evidence, and they'll be telling you about it, but they are interpreting that evidence and then delivering it to you. You're not just seeing the evidence on its own, what was actually there. So for that reason, primary sources are generally considered more reliable than secondary sources. Sorry. Let's take a look at this example here. We have two primary sources from a football match or a soccer match, whatever you want to call it. If you like basketball, pretend it's basketball, right? We have the blue witness and then we have the green witness. They both provided a statement on what they have seen. This is a primary source because it's someone who is actually at this football match. We're going to have a look at these and see if they're a little bit different and talk about what that might mean. Okay, so the first quote, the first primary source is from a supporter of the blue team. Let's see what they have to say. Our team was definitely better than the green team in the first half. They couldn't keep up with us. We should have had at least 2 penalties, but the referee was clearly on their side. In the second half, their striker got lucky and the ball bounced off him into our net. Our team kept fighting until the end, but we just couldn't quite get a goal back. We were just unlucky. So the supporter of the blue team thinks it was all down to luck. Let's think about their point of view there. They're saying, really, the blue team should have won, but the green team had some unfair advantages and some luck on their side. Let's have a look at what the green team supporter had to say, and if it's a bit different. They say, what a brilliant game. We deserved to win. Our players completely outplayed them. The referee made some really important decisions in the first half. The blue team thought they deserved a couple of penalties, but their players were just diving. Our striker scored an excellent goal in the second half, and their keeper never saw it coming. After that, their team just gave up. All in all, it was a fantastic win for us. And that was from a supporter of the green team. So they're both a little bit different, aren't they? The blue team is saying things happened one way and they were kind of just unlucky and the green team was a bit unfair. And the green team is saying we won because we had more skill, because we're just the better players. So they're two people at the same place, but they have different opinions of what happened, okay? Here is where we get into distinguishing fact from opinion. Think about the facts that we can determine here. What do we definitely know for sure happened? We know the green team did win, okay? We can determine from both of these sources the green team was the winner. We can never know for sure if it's because the referees made bad calls or good calls, or if it was because of skill, but we do know that the green team won. So that is how we can come to that conclusion if we were studying this as a historical event, okay? You don't have to write any of that down. Notice there's no symbol in the corner. That was just for me to explain to you. Now, we do have to write some of this down. We're going to talk about the idea of bias, which is what we just talked about there, okay? You'll have to write down what's in the yellow boxes, just the title and this one sentence. It's not too much. And I'll take us through this slide. Both of the previous sources were biased, and bias is a preference for or prejudiced against something. So that means your own opinion of what you think can determine how you view a scenario. We've even been talking about this in English, right? Your own perspective, your own identity can influence your perspective and how you see things. So in that case, right, if we go back, the blue team was probably going to think it was because of luck, because they lost, and they don't want to think of themselves as bad players. The green team is probably biased towards thinking that they're better players and that's why they won, because that way they can feel better about themselves, right? So in the same way, in the case of the football teams, like we just talked about, each supporter had a bias for their own team and against the other team. Each team wanted to look good and they wanted the other team to look bad. So we have to take those biases into account, We have to say, okay, the blue team probably is going to say bad things about the green team. The green team is probably going to say bad things about the blue team. What we can definitely determine is that the green team won that match. That is what the evidence points to. That is not a question. All right. So that's why when we're reading sources, we have to be aware that there might be some bias. The person delivering the information to us might want us to think a certain thing. And this can affect the reliability of the information we can get from the source. All right. So make sure you've got that written down. What's in those yellow boxes? We do need to have that down. Okay. And that brings us to the idea of, is it fact or is it opinion? So it's really important to be able to tell the difference between facts and opinions when studying history. I'm going to take us through an exercise now, and we're going to try to determine whether or not something is fact or opinion. But before we do that, let's get this written down. All right. So we want to have the little subheading here, fact or opinion, and we're going to write this down. This is really key, and it will really help us with our upcoming assessment and with the things we need to know for this unit. Facts only provide information on what actually happened, while opinions tend to compare or make a judgment. So what that means is a fact will often just say, on this date, this is what happened, right? But an opinion will usually try to make a comparison. So for example, an opinion might say, dogs are better than cats. Is that a fact? No, that's just your opinion, right? A fact might be in World War II, or we'll say a fact might be World War II went from 1939 to 1945. Whereas an opinion might compare the two and say World War II was much worse than World War I. You're making a comparison there, right? And someone might disagree with you. That's just your opinion. So make sure you have this written down, and then we're gonna have a look and see if we can see if these things are fact or fiction. And I'm just realizing now I've just said one of these to you. So the first one we'll probably get right, but we'll see how we go. Is this a fact or is this opinion? Let's have a look. World War II began in 1939 and ended in 1945. Is that a fact or is that opinion? Have a guess. You don't have to write it down. Just have a guess, have a think. Your answer is in 3, 2, 1. Now, it is a fact, okay? How do we know that's a fact? It's simply saying World War II began on this date and it ended in this date. He's not saying World War II is better or worse than another world war, or he's not saying he thinks it is there. He thinks something particular about it. This person is just saying what year it went from. He's just saying a fact. He's not introducing his opinion. Let's take another look at fact or opinion. What about this? World War II was worse than World War I. Is that fact or opinion? Have a guess. 3, 2, 1. Pause the video if you need to and have a guess. It is an opinion. We're making a comparison now, right? Now we're saying World War II was worse than World War I. All right? We're making a comparison. There's no way to prove that, really. I suppose you could compare deaths and make a case, but this is not a fact. This is just an opinion, right? So hopefully we can kind of see the difference between fact and opinion. If someone's doing a comparison, or they're saying one thing is better than another thing, we're looking at opinion. But if something is just saying this happened on this particular date, we're looking at it being more of a fact, okay? Now, I've designed a Kahoot that you can use to test your knowledge on what we've talked about today, okay? If we're doing this in class, we'll all do it together. If you're doing it on your own, you can actually do a Kahoot on your own, and I'll kind of take you through that now. So just go ahead and click on this link, and that will take us to Kahoot, and we'll click on Play Solo. You can play solo. That will take you here, and then you can go Classic mode. I generally just use Classic mode. It's the one we all know and love. Right, you can click on that and it will take us through some questions covering what we have talked about today. It will give you some automatic names that are just NPCs, right? Sometimes my students call me an NPC. These guys are actual real life NPCs. So I might say, Mr. Rhoda, type in with one hand. Okay, go. And it will take us through some questions after you put your name in. Okay. So it's going to take us through sources, reliability, and fact versus fiction. These are the things we've been talking about. I want you to have a go at answering these questions. So the first question will ask, which of the following is a primary source? You may need to go back to the slide and have a look. That's okay. I want you to try to aim to get all of these right. You may need to try a couple of times, go back to the slide and have a look. You'll be able to really answer these questions. It's really going to help us out Okay, we'll close that. I don't want to give you any more answers. Okay, so give that a Kahoot a go. And I think that is my last slide. So look, guys, hopefully that was good for you. I'm just trying this new online format. I know sometimes it can get a little bit loud in the classroom. In this way, I can still give you the information that I wanted to give you. And honestly, if you're really focusing in on it, you'll be able to do it in about half the time that we can in the class. So let me know what you think about this, okay? And you can also come back and study this. So on the weekend or after school, or if you get home and you think, oh, I forget what sir was saying, and you look at your book, maybe you can't remember what you were talking about in your book, come back and watch this video where I'll explain it in detail like I have here today. It can be used as a great study resource. Right? That's what I want to get you guys in the habit of doing. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next lesson, which will be on Monday. I'll see you on Monday, right, after the weekend. Bye, everybody. See ya.